Gene Simmons again opened his big fat sewer, and he said something to the effect of today artists have no chance or no hope to making it big. It's simply impossible to make it big in the music industry. And of course, the ones who ruin the music industry is you, the consumers, because you download free music and music is so readily and easily and cheaply accessible from YouTube and Spotify and you name it. And typically, I'm in favor of just examining the facts, what has been said. Who said it is less relevant. But in this specific case, it's extremely disingenuous coming from Simmons. He definitely should know better. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that he knows he's not telling the truth. He's just taking his anger out on the easiest culprit. And the truth about free downloads, that maybe it does affect album sales to some extent, but whenever you observe some sort of phenomenon, social, cultural, commercial phenomenon, you have to always go back some years, about a decade, two, three, four sometimes. And when these technological changes came along, who was the first to jump on the bandwagon? The music industry. They started the digital recordings, the digital recording tables, the digital dissemination of music. When CDs came along in 1982, I think the first commercial CDs came out. I think Asia was one of the first bands whose record came out simultaneously on CD and LP and cassette. So they had no problems with it. So the bulk of the guilt, let's just say, is on the music industry themselves. They were drunk on their power and the money and the insane profits that they made. In the 80s, it became a huge machine and they were signing on artists. And everybody knows and remembers what the music scene was in the 80s. Total madness. It wasn't all bad, but people made tons and tons of money and they neglected their duties. They didn't see the writing on the wall, and the writing was on the wall, because when they introduced CDs, they didn't care about the customers. They didn't care about people like myself and many other people that I know who preferred staying with the record, who had relatively large record libraries. We wanted to continue with this, and by the late 80s, early 90s, most bands were not releasing their albums on regular record, only on CD, and then eventually the CD also died. Back then, nobody was screaming, nobody said that it's terrible, nobody said that it destroys the industry. So it's very, very dishonest now to blame the customer or solely the customer. Second, by and large, the industry now navigated away again from the albums. So until the 60s, early mid 60s, it was mostly single oriented, single based. It was possible to release a single, sell it for cheap, and that introduced a band. And then if there was enough material, they recorded an album, which was sort of a bigger investment. And now we're kind of coming back to that. Artists are now able to release single pieces of music. They don't have to record a full album. And one of the big complaints that started emerging roughly around the mid 90s is that there was a lot of so-called filler. So that term didn't exist in the 70s and the 80s. I think the first time I heard that term was early 2000s or maybe late 90s, because they were still following the old format of recording an entire album when they didn't really have enough material for an entire album. So now they're released from that. And the entire process from creating the music to getting it to the hand of the customers became way easier with the internet. So someone with a guitar in his home and a laptop, he has a recording studio, a virtual recording studio. That's part of the same technological advancement, right? So blaming technology, in my opinion, is utterly stupid. There is an anecdote which may or may not be true, but it is said that once Thomas Edison was walking outside with a friend of his, and they passed by a construction site where they saw these big early bulldozers and one of these big machines. And his friend looked at it and then lamented. He said, "Oh my God, this machine would put so many people out of jobs." To which Edison responded, "Oh, so maybe we should let them dig with spoons because it will employ more people, right?" So this is the same thing here. There were people in the music industry undoubtedly lost their jobs with the introduction of digital technology. No one was complaining then, right? Now all of a sudden, the album sales are seemingly down, and bands have the means to compensate for this. They're complaining. So first of all, they neglected to prepare properly, to make maybe software safeguards to make the music not to be so easily disseminated, or just other commercial or economic or marketing safeguards for themselves to make up for the profit. It's squarely on them, or mostly on them, because the benefits outweigh in a big way, or in many ways, not for everybody. But it's way easier to discover new artists. Our new artists can put themselves in front of customers via social media and things of that nature. So blaming technology is pretty stupid. And the internet per se brought with it another perspective, and that is that it, in some crazy way, it maybe changed the elasticity of time, or at least the way that people relate to it. So before the advent of the internet, and especially before, when there was MTV and music so readily available via television, you had to buy a physical newspaper to have a subscription, or to listen to a radio to discover new artists. So to be constantly in the record store. So in other words, you had to have some sort of investment, of more of a personal relationship with the music, be interested in it. And that's how you discovered many artists. And you were pretty limited, putting aside the record store. But if you just listen to radio or television, or even subscription to a paper magazine, you were pretty much exposed only to what was going on then. So if a band was defunct or was not doing anything, you didn't know about them. Now with YouTube, there is a younger generation that discovers old music. So new music that comes out is competing not only with their generation, with their peers, but all the previous generations. So someone releases a song now, and they have to compete for the customer's attention with Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Pink Floyd, Judas Priest, you name it. So the customer is more informed, and the customer has more knowledge or more information at their disposition. So yes, that creates sort of a stumbling block, but it really can, and in some cases is used as a prod. So it encourages bands to be good, because now they're being judged against all of these older bands, and now they have to work harder. And in fact, from a purely technical perspective, modern musicians are, or tend to be, much better, and that's across many musical styles. So even classical musicians, you can see pianists and violinists and jazz trumpet and saxophone players who on a technical level are inimaginable, and yet inside the music is turned and is not as alive or as genuine, as truly lived through as it used to be in the past. You can open YouTube and you can see kids 12, 14 years old take out their electric guitar and do all these crazy runs like Malmsteen and Van Halen, and the technical level just went through the stratosphere, and yet the music in general isn't that great. And that's another I don't want to say commonplace, but a lot of people talk about it. I think that Rick Beato made a big video about it some time ago, and he was asking why is music so bad these days, or music is so bad these days, and we want to understand why. I don't think that this is necessarily true. There might be some good music out there, but again, the great music is still available. So the question is why? Why do we need new good music if we have so much of a back catalog available to all? Maybe that is in and of itself an impedance to new music. So there is a term, disposable music, and people use it sometimes. It's kind of derogatory for the very poppy, the synth pop kind of acts that have been forgotten, right? But they've been there also in the 80s. And when people talk about the big old bands of the 60s and the 70s, things like Jethro Tull and King Crimson and Fleetwood Mac, you name it, the big bands, people say, oh, it's 30 years, 40 years, 50 years after the fact, and we're still listening to this music. So if you're surprised, if you're saying that there's something unexpected or something out of the ordinary, that's kind of a tacit admission that it was meant to be disposable from the get-go, right? And in fact, that is, I think, one of the problems that the industry is kind of was expected to be very temporary, very very fleeting, and it ended up not being so fleeting. So yeah, modern music definitely had a sort of a degradation in the appeal and in the quality, maybe, if you want, and it has some causes, but it's not free downloads. Again, Gene didn't say it directly like this, but one of the reasons that you can't make it big, as he claims and as he fumes, is because simply modern music is lost a lot of its appeal. And there might be some other reasons that are not really related or not directly related to the internet and electronic music and file sharing and things of that nature. First of all, almost every generation produced a kind of music that rebelled against the previous generation. There was punk, there was alternative already in the mid to late 70s, and then in the mid to late 80s. And then I think that the big turning point came with grunge. In grunge, a couple things happened. Grunge already grew up in the new technology, in the new music production technology. So in the early 90s, pretty much the entire industry had switched or transformed to mostly digital. So everything was a lot easier, everything was a lot more affordable. The industry itself has matured. The industry was a well-oiled machine. There were PR people and AR people and marketing people and manufacturing the CDs and distributing them, the distributing channels, the press was like that. And the people who played grunge, all of these bands that I happen not to like at all, whatever the names were, Pumpkins in Chains and Smashing Alice and Sonic Jam, I don't know what, Pearl Youth. These bands, they never really spoke to me. I was never really into that style. I really became aware of it when they were kind of on the way out in the late 90s. But be it as it may, those guys were born, let's just say in the 60s, early 60s to early 70s. So they grew up already with the music industry at their disposition. First of all, from an economical background, the general economy in the Western world was such that leisure and entertainment was taken for granted, was a normal part of life. Every so often you went to watch a movie, you went out to a restaurant, you went on a vacation, even in the poorer places of the Western world, even in Eastern Europe under the Iron Curtain, these were of course much less common than in the West, but they were not unheard of. People in Czech Republic, Hungary, Bulgaria, they went on vacations, they went to the movies, they went to restaurants. Of course, it was not on the same level as in the West, but case in point is that leisure and entertainment were taken for granted by very large swaths of the population, and so too consuming music. And so by the 90s, we had a generation that grew up on that. If you think about it, in 1982, Rush released what is it called, Subdivisions, right? And he's complaining there that he's being forced into a mold, and his parents are forcing him to be a lawyer and a doctor. I mean, just think about it. Compared to what it was a few decades ago, that parents should even have expectations for that. There was something very out of the ordinary. And now your parents want a good future for you. They want you to have a good, fulfilling kind of line of work for you, a profession for you. They want you to be a doctor, to heal people, to save lives. Okay, lawyers is a disgusting profession, but it has some appeal. In the 80s, people didn't think of it that way. So your parents want your good and you're complaining about it. So what is your option? Becoming a rock star. So when the grunge kids grew up, rock star was another option, engineer, doctor, lawyer, rock star. And they wanted to be rock stars. And they came out and it was handed over to them on a silver platter. And I think that's why grunge has so much resentment and anger and hate, and it all looks fake, right? They had a band raging for the establishment, right? Pretending to be against the establishment, and they were just parroting the establishment lines. And to me, these bands, they were always devoid of content. They dramatized this guy from Nirvana, the guy who committed suicide, Kurt Cobain, or Cobain maybe. I never really understood what all the hype was about him. To me, the music wasn't great, and the songs wasn't great. There was just this kind of pace to make everything bleak and single dimensional, and just hate and anger and resentment. And it's pretty much across the board. Almost all of these bands were like that. And I think because inside they knew that it was fake. They didn't go through the struggle of bands like Black Sabbath and Judas Priest and Deep Purple and Pink Floyd. And by the way, some of those kids, they also came from well-to-do families. So two things in regards with that. Number one, if you compare, I think one of the best examples is Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, right? Because they're so similar from the time and the music and the appearance. They kind of almost always mentioned in one breath. Almost any fan of one of these two bands will be a fan of the other, right? But Maiden's quality and professionalism wise, and especially in the marketing and the financials and the appearance, Maiden was always a step ahead. I mean, when they came out, so very fast in the history of the bands. They just say within 3 years of bursting onto the scene, like 83, 84, Maiden was already a bigger name, a bigger brand than Judas Priest. I don't know about sales, but I think that they sold more records, at least per album. Maybe not in the aggregate, because Priest maybe has twice as many records. But anyway, there was the big difference between them. That Maiden came from a better educational and better economic background. So they had the intellect to choose a better management. Maybe there was an aspect of luck. They also might have gotten luckier. No one's denying that. But you can see, however, Maiden were still genuine. So they left college, they left good universities, and so did Robert Fripp and Ian Anderson and David Gilmour, if I'm not mistaken. So these people took a risk, and they approached it as art. Yes, they became famous in the process. They made money, but they didn't come with this attitude. To me, grunge always kind of took it for granted, like you owe me, like I stepped out of the cradle, I just became a teenager, and you owe me. I have to be a rock star. And also their involvement in politics. It's not that politics didn't exist in music, or that musicians didn't have a political opinion, but they stated their opinion. Some of them were more vocal about it, some of them were more quiet. But the grunge kids, they kind of made it up in front of their music and their appearance, and who they were, and they always went on one side. There was no diversity. They were all the same thing. They all went to the same political direction, and they all made it in the same hateful and resentful and arrogant and condescending way. um, Eddie Vedder and what's the other guy? Dave Grohl come to mind. They always spoke I remember Dave Grohl spoke at Lemmy's funeral, and he said nice things about Lemmy, but the way he approached it, like I'm somebody, I'm an expert, I'm somebody to eulogize Lemmy, and I knew him. They all came with this kind of condescending and nasty, looking down on you attitude, like you owe me and I deserve it. And again, that's very natural. It's not like other rock bands didn't become considered arrogant, but not in this nasty looking down on your audience way. And by the way, before you say it, mega props to both. What's his name, Vedder and the other guy, Grohl, for fighting Ticketmaster and Live Nation. So props to them on that. No qualms. I agree 100%, and it was great. And on the other hand, shame on the other big bands who were in their times. If all the bands would have said that, if Priest and Maiden and all across the different musical styles, Crohn's disease, I think, Corn's disease, whatever are they called, and Cockroach Papa, whatever. I forget the name of these bands. Limp Dick, not Limp, something, Limp Cockroach, Biscuit, something like that. They were very famous and they had power, so they could have gone with Vedder and Grohl and boycott Live Nation, and I think that they could have succeeded, but they didn't really want. But when it comes to the downloads hurt our income and blah blah blah, and it's hurting record sales, so all of a sudden most musicians are in tandem with that and in agreement. So I think that is a big part of the problem, that after the 90s everything became so easy and so cheesy and so streamlined that really the soul went out of it, right? For example, a lot of rock and heavy metal is really based musically in the blues, right? And if you listen to a lot of blues, especially the early blues, the Delta blues, but even early Chicago blues, so if you're talking about Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, Albert King, B.B. King, all of that, they spoke about misery, but that was genuine, that was true, even though after a certain point in their career they were doing very well. But the origins, let's put it this way. You can make the case that all of these guys, these Chicago guys that I mentioned, they were bluesmen. They were people with hardships who took it out and became professional musicians. So it was an art form. If you take, another two who made it big, definitely after the internet era, maybe not completed the file sharing. And I mean Joe Bonamassa and John Mayer, right? Serious musicians, good musicians, but their blues is not the same blues as Albert King's blues or B.B. King's blues or Muddy Waters or Howlin' Wolf or any of these guys, Otis Rush. They are professional musicians who grew up in musical homes or with musical education and chose to play the blues as a musical style, whereas the original Chicago guys were guys with the blues, with the actual blues, who took it out of music and created the blues. So big difference here. But again, just to show you that even serious musicians can make it, I think both Bonamassa and John Mayer were born in the late 70s, and they had albums out by the early 2000s, between 2000 and 2000, two, three, something like that. So again, a little bit before the smartphone age, but they really became big and famous after the smartphone age. So it's certainly preposterous and untrue that you cannot make it. Maybe there's less demand, and again, in the 80s, it was already madness. There was one band after another, and like I told you, it became a very well-oiled machine. So the music industry had its own press. Oh, and one more thing, just kind of to illustrate my points, right? All of the heavy metal bands, the crazy bands, the Motley Crue and the Makeup and the Wasp and Kiss and Twisted Sister and all that kind of family, Bon Jovi, Winger, Cinder, the list is endless. But these had their own separate cater, their own kind of concerts. They had their own press. They were never in the big magazines, right? Typically, if the magazines ever wrote about them, it wasn't in complimentary terms. So the New York Times and the big music magazine, that's a disgrace, and I won't even mention its title, but it's kind of, there was Circus, and then there was the other one, right? So the mainstream music press, the RS and the Circus and all these, they immediately embraced grunge. Why? Because they were birds of a feather. They were all fake. They were all disingenuous. They were all extreme left with a condescendent and conceited, arrogant and entitled kind of approach. So that's one. These all of these artists, not all of them, but many of the artists who came, especially in during the 90s and early 2000s, they came that we deserve it. They were entitled. They were entitled to the fame and fortune. But on the other hand, they demanded the respect of a true artist. Like, oh, we're Rembrandt, we're Beethoven, we're Schubert, Schumann. And if you look at classical music, the big classical composers, they were not rock stars in by any means. Some of them died unknown. And broken alone, and some of them made it. Haydn was the only one. Haydn is the only classical composer who was truly a bona fide rock star, again of his time, not to that kind of excessive, but he got to do and experience things that pretty much no one else except the super rich of the nobility did. But again, that's a whole different discussion. But according to legend, Beethoven died broken alone, and only his dog attended the funeral. That's not true. So I think that Brahms and some other famous people did attend his funeral. It's true that it was raining, so it was difficult, but he didn't die completely broken alone. But again, the point is that these many of the classics, right? The painters, Rembrandt, Rubens, all these guys, they didn't accomplish huge fame and fortune, but these kids from the 90s, they want the fame and the fortune of a rock and roller. They want the respect of an artist, and they want the status and the kind of respect and seriousness of some experienced statesman or general who fought 5 wars, and his opinion, and accept my opinion or else. So there is that, and indeed, about a decade or two later, this wheel was kind of reversed. So now many rock bands, these newer kind of rock or heavy metal bands, I'm not so familiar, but I think Tool and Sevenfold, Avenged Sevenfold. So there's some better bands who backed down a little bit from that attitude, and there's kind of a revival of classic heavy metal. But there was one other thing that I wanted to mention that also people don't wanna admit. It's that art, and not just art, but many cultural phenomena have a life cycle. It goes through a life cycle, right? There was the era of classical music. Then there was the latter classical music, right? Stravinsky, Tchaikovsky, the latter ones, Dvorak, these guys. Those who came later, and then it went into a transitory period with kind of before it became jazz. So there was a little bit of of mixing with folk music that was still elegant and still geared a little bit towards the well-to-do. There was no nobility, but I'm talking about things like very early Sinatra kind of music, Gershwin, right? Sort of a bridge between classical and jazz. And then there was, of course, the big explosion of jazz. There was the classic jazz of the tens and the twenties, Armstrong and Django Reinhardt and Dizzy Gillespie, these boring guys that I can't listen to them more than 5 seconds. But then they came the bebop and the fusion, and now it's kind of also slowly going down. So same thing with rock music. People are simply tired. They don't want the same old thing. If you want a good Black Sabbath or Deep Purple or Jethro Tull record, you don't even have to play the record or to pop it in your CD. You just go on your favorite website or whatever app and you play the song. But there's so many concerts that you cannot see them all. So it became a little bit oversaturated. People are tired, and realistically, everything that has been said, that could be said, has already been said. I don't hear in any of the new bands anything new and exciting. Even the great ones, those who are technically cool, right? Those that I mentioned, Sevenfold and Tool. It's okay, but like you want Tool, go back to the real deal. Go back to King Crimson. Go back to Mogul Fresh. Go back to listen to the original thing. So to me, it doesn't really offer a meaningful advantage. I never go, I want to listen to something and let me hear some Tool, let me hear some Avenged Sevenfold. I always go to the shelf and I pull out something that I already know. So again, there is of course the fact that you're already used to and you want to hear it again. I get it. But that quest for new music, I think is if it's not completely dead, it's dying. Right now there's some sort of revival of traditional heavy metal, new wave of traditional heavy metal, bands like Demon Knight or things to that effect. So I think that this is it, and really shame on Gene Simmons, someone who was within the industry, someone who saw that happen in front of his eyes, and he saw the industry dancing and partying and not getting ready for the file sharing and the ease of sharing files, and didn't prepare, and now they're blaming you, the customers, those who made them famous, and especially Simmons, who comes from the era where you were not guaranteed to become a rock star, and when rock star was kind of looked at as what, you're not going to be an engineer, right? So I think he's dead wrong, and I think that even Rick Beato did not truly and properly address the reasons why music is that terrible today. And maybe it's not completely true, because here and there you always find little sparks and little stuff. Again, Oznoy, but again, that's more like of a jazz, modern technical jazz. But that also has the same kind of problem. In fact, people even say it even about Frank Gambale and to some extent maybe even Pat Metheny. That's not really a very deserved criticism. But Noy and Gambale and those musicians of that style, they have been criticized for playing a little bit too clinical, a little bit too methodical, a little bit too scientific, right? Sort of Alan Holdsworth, but Alan Holdsworth had some sort of soul, had some sort of a bluesy, rocky spark, madness in him. But that's all I have for today. So not directly record reviews, but again, as long as it's in the family, I'm good. And until the next time, rock on.